Welcome back, everyone. Now that we have seen how to design methods that accept values, let's take it a step further and let's design methods that accept more than a single value. So let's create a new class in our package called section2_3, and we're going to call it methods accepting multiple values. Finish. So let's create our main class where we will call our methods. Let's create our main method where we will call other methods. And let's look at what we mean when we say designing methods that accept multiple values. So I'm going to create int largest. And I'm going to call math_max method. I'm going to pass in two arguments. And pay attention how Java developers, how Java designers named these int arguments when they designed max method. So they named it argument 0 and int argument 1, correct? Now we're going to pass in number 125 and we're going to pass in number 67. And we're going to close the statement. In this statement, what we're doing is we're calling math class's max method that returns the highest value of two numbers. Okay? Now, what happened here is I did not pass in one number. This is not 125.67. There are two numbers here, two int values, 125 and 67. Now, the question is, can we design a similar method? And I believe you already know the answer is yes. So let's create a new method, public static void, and then let's do this. I want to call this method smart printer. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask a user to pass in a string parameter that's going to be called text. And I'm going to ask the user to pass in another parameter, another argument of int type, and I'm going to call it number. So this is my smart printer. This smart printer method has a signature that allows it to accept string parameter and an int parameter. Okay, great. Now let's create my local variables, string str, doesn't matter how you want to call it, you can make a practice out of it. And this is going to be taking the value of the text that is going to be passed in by the user, and int num is equal to number. Okay, now what we're going to do here is since this is a smart printer, we're not going to use print line. When we're not going to need to use print line in our main method anymore. If you want to print something that will have a text and a number, we will call our smart printer. And our smart printer will have a nested system out print line that will take the value of str. Oops, something went wrong there. That will take the value of str, concatenate it with an empty string, or let's add this colon instead of empty string, and it will also concatenate the num that will be passed by the user. Okay, so I'm going to do this. String text is equal to the largest number. So now names don't matter, because what we said is this method is run in a stack memory in Java, correct? Now, when this method runs in a stack memory, the variables of this method are local variables: text, number, str, num, right? You cannot access these variables from outside. That's why we're never going to have a collision like this. So let me call my smart printer. When I call it, and when I use Eclipse's shortcut to hold Control and press space, it tells me that this smart printer method accepts two values, two parameters. First parameter is going to be called text of type string. Second parameter is going to be called number of type int. So I will just keep text as is because I have a text variable here. This will be passed in automatically here, right? And the number variable, I'm going to change it to largest. So what will happen is this text that contains the string, the largest number, is going to be passed in here. And since it is passed in here as an argument, it goes, when stack memory looks into this, calls this method, it adds this value into text. And automatically this value comes from text to here and it gets assigned to str. And we're going to print str, which is going to be equal to the largest number. Then we're going to print out semicolon and space. Now let's see where the num is going to come from. So when we call this method, the largest passed in value is going to be equal to 125, right? An int value of 125. This is going to be passed into the instead of number. And then we're going to take this value of number variable here, assign it into num value. So obviously this number 125, the largest value of these two, will be assigned all the way up to num, and then it will be printed here. When I run it, it will simply print out the largest number, 125. Let's practice something else. Let's practice passing in straight texts. So smart printer, I need to pass in a text, right? I'm going to call it degrees outside in Fahrenheit, comma. I'm going to separate my arguments by a comma, okay? It's going to be, for example, 88. When I do this, when I pass these two values, there are two values separated by a comma. And again, spaces like this doesn't matter. So if you need to add another space to help you with visualization, feel free to do so. So comma is going to separate my string value parameter from my int parameter. When I run it, I will get degrees outside in Fahrenheit, 88. So instead of calling system.out.println every single time, if I want to print out text concatenated with the semicolon and concatenated with a number that I'm going to pass in, I can just call my smart printer. Okay, that's it. So multiple multiple arguments are as simple as single argument methods. You can have, there is no limit of how many arguments you can have here. Double, for example, d, var d, for example, float, etc., etc., etc. However, it's usually a good practice to keep your parameters as up to 4. Usually, you need to keep them around 1, 2, or 3 max. Okay. Now, all this goes without repeating that you can only pass in the exact same type of data when you are calling these methods. So if you have a string here, you have to pass a string here. If you have an int here, you have to pass an int here. In the same exact order. Method signature will dictate how you do what you do. If you can have 2 int values, so the math class's max method obviously has 2 int values. You can have 3 string values. You can have whatever you want to, however you pass them in, that's the way you will be able to call the method. So you cannot, you cannot pass in char here, neither can you pass in a double here instead of a int. Okay, so these are the main points that I would like to specify about methods. Remember, your method signature dictates what you are going to do. If your smart printer has 2 parameters, you have to, I repeat, you have to pass 2 parameters. If you remember from our previous class, if you have 1 parameter, you have to pass 1 parameter. You cannot leave it empty. If you have no parameters, these are no parameter methods. From now on, we're going to call them no-args method. No arguments, basically, right? So when you hear no-args, means no arguments. When you hear 2-args, it means 2 arguments or 2 parameters. So this is a no-args method. So when you're told to create a no-args method called method no values accepted, you just create a method with this signature, and you don't pass any arguments in the parentheses. Whatever the signature is, That's how you will be able to call the method. Otherwise, you're going to run in trouble and your compiler will not work, your code will not compile, and it will throw an error. Well, thank you very much for your time. I will see you next time, and next time we will look into documentation. We'll look into how we can make our lives easier to understand our methods 2 years after we've written them and forgotten about them. I will see you then. Thank you very much for your time.